All right, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Hello. Welcome to what will be an amazing session. Our seventh in the lived experience stream. Super exciting. Power and Place, Amplifying Voices for Housing Justice. My name is Alex Nelson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the co-chair of the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network, and I'm super, super happy to be here and joined with our amazing speakers today. Before we get going, I want to acknowledge that Jabuktuk, or colonially Halifax, is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq peoples. Halifax is also home to Afro-Canadian communities that have also been part of the story of this place for many, many years, and whose presence is incredibly important for us to acknowledge in this space and in this conference. And I hope that we can move forward with this conversation, knowing that all of our spaces and conversations about lived experience have to meaningfully also be in dialogue with movements for decolonization and justice in our systems that desperately need to be changed. So today we have two amazing presentations from Cedar Michelle and Jupi Bowen. We'll begin today with a presentation from Cedar, Prison, a Homelessness Factory. I'll ask that folks save their questions to the end of the presentation. Since we have two presenters, we should have lots of time for really incredible, thoughtful discussion. And with that, we can go ahead and get started.
Everyone. So I think the program said that this was going to be a bilingual session, but it's not. Je crois que dans le programme, il est indiqué que cette présentation sera bilingue, ce qui n'est pas du tout le cas, malheureusement. Je suis désolée. Si vous êtes venu en vous attendant un truc en français, but sorry, it was a miscommunication, so it's going to be just in English. So this is a presentation about prison. To talk about prison, I will be talking about violence, including just mentions of sexual violence. I won't be describing any specific incidents or getting into any details, but it will be touched on in general terms. And just prison itself is a pretty traumatic subject. So I know I sometimes need to have control over when I hear about it and how. So if you need to get up and leave, please do. I won't be offended. At the end, I'm going to hang around outside in case anybody needs to debrief. So please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. My name's Cedar. I work at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness as their French content coordinator on the communications team. And I really want to thank the COH for their support in just being able to show up and be in spaces like this and talk to all of you. It's lovely. I have a lot of experience with the provincial prison system in Ontario, and which is very similar to the provincial prison systems across the country. And what I'll be sharing today is based less on research than on that experience. I've been locked up in Ontario's provincial prisons 5 different times for a total of about a year. And I've been in 5 different prisons. I've been placed on a number of different units. So I've got a sense of the range of experiences that people might have. I've had a bit of a grab bag of what the prison system has to offer. I don't feel particularly ashamed or proud of this. It's just a part of my life that colors how I see the world. And I appreciate you all being down to hear about it. One problem about speaking from experience, though, and Alex was just touching on this too, is that there's no singular experience of prison. And I moved through the prison system with a lot of privilege, just like I do in other parts of my life, because white privilege is still definitely real inside prisons, doubly so in the courts. So it's just good to remember that the people who end up telling their stories in places like this one are not necessarily representative of who is doing time in this country. In addition to my own experiences of incarceration, you can see from the little picture up there, is I've been involved in prisoner support and solidarity organizing for many years. The group that I'm part of in Hamilton, Ontario, we try to monitor conditions in our local provincial prison. We maintain a P.O. box and we operate a support phone line that's open 7 days a week. It's entirely unfunded. We throw parties and run fundraisers to cover the cost of the line, all volunteer. We're often the only outside contact that prisoners have. I've talked to hundreds of locked up people this way and developed a few long-term friendships. One last introductory note. Hey, that's great. One last introductory note is that I'm a prison abolitionist. I think prisons create more problems than they solve, and we'd be better off without them. I won't be trying to convince you of that in this talk, and I don't expect you to agree with me, but if you feel like arguing about it later over coffee, there's a good chance I'll be down. I just want to be clear about where I'm coming from, since it colors the language that I use to talk about things, like, for instance, calling everything prison, instead of using euphemisms like corrections. Why should we think about prison? Talking about prison is taboo. Canadian society deals with it far less than is common in the States, for instance. And my experience is that most people don't know anything about what prison conditions are like here if they or a loved one haven't gone through it. One reason for this is that prison produces silence. It functions like a black box. A lot of attention is paid upstream to crime and the justice system, and the negative outcomes post-release downstream are pretty well understood. But the space in the middle, the cages full of humans, is left out of the picture. I think this lack of attention is a huge problem, because prison is central to how lots of different forms of oppression and injustice reproduce themselves. Prison is a key support for maintaining class society and economic injustice. It's a major tool of racist and colonial violence, keeping whole communities down. It produces trauma on a mass scale. It steeps our loved ones in a violent, misogynistic, and homophobic prisoner culture, and then exports that culture back out into our communities. It takes away all autonomy and control, right down to choosing your own clothes, and it trains people to be helpless. If we want to find solutions to complicated problems like homelessness, we need to start with curiosity about people's experiences, which means understanding the details of the systems we might not normally think about, like prison. We need to take a look inside the black box. So prisons in Canada can be broken down into two broad groups. There's federal prisons, or penitentiaries, for people who are sentenced to 24 months or more. I won't be talking about federal today, but when people think about Canadian prisons at all, as opposed to just thinking about TV depictions of American prisons, they're usually picturing federal. That represents about a third of all prisoners. Then there's provincial prisons, for people who are sentenced to less than 24 months or who have been denied bail. Everyone in the system passes through provincial prison, and a majority of people do all their time there. 2/3 of all prisoners are in provincial. That's 150,000 admissions into provincial prison a year across the country. And they get way less attention than federal prisons, but they impact more people, and the conditions in them are far, far worse, as we will see. I'm going to be focused on Ontario in this presentation, because that's where my experience is, but a lot of this stuff is broadly true across the provinces. I did a little bit of research about the Nova Scotia system to be able to know what's different, and hopefully there'll be people here who are more knowledgeable than I am who can chime in during discussion if they want. So provincial prisons can be further subdivided. I'm going to focus on adult provincial prisons, but there's also youth prisons. In Ontario, these are privatized and are run by youth-focused agencies like Banyan Community Services. It turns out they are prison profiteers. These are pictures of a maximum security youth prison in Hamilton, Ontario, just up in a different neighborhood from where I live. In Nova Scotia, it seems like these prisons are run by the province, although outside services plug in. There's also mental health prisons for people who are deemed not criminally responsible during sentencing or at trial. In Ontario, they're also privatized and operate as wards within psychiatric hospitals. And there are a couple of facilities that are operated directly by the province as well. It seems that in Nova Scotia, there's a single facility that does this job, and it's the East Coast Forensic Hospital, run by the Capital District Health Authority in partnership with the provincial government. And these kind of mental health prisons are different than the mental health units or treatment centers that are operated by the province. They're really for people who have been found not criminally responsible. Adult provincial prisons are operated by the provincial government. And so like guards in Ontario are unionized through OPSU, in Nova Scotia they're through the NSGEU. The medical staff are hired by the ministry responsible and don't answer to the regular prison hierarchy. They're part of their provincial college of nurses. In Ontario, there's 25 adult prisons in total, with around 7,500 people locked up in them on any given day. There are also several new prisons slated to be built in the coming years, and that's something people don't always think about, is that the prison system is constantly physically evolving in order to meet its changing demands, because the political nature of prison is always shifting. It's a very political institution, and it does this by physically building new walls, new cages. And provincial prisons in Ontario can be further subdivided into detention centres or in correctional centres. The detention centre is where you go if you get denied bail and are doing time while waiting for trial. And you also stay in a detention centre if you get sentenced to less than 3 months. Correctional centres are people who got sentenced to more than 3 months, but less than 2 years. So I don't think they do the same distinction in Nova Scotia. Like, for instance, the Burnside jail holds both kinds of prisoners. It looks like they might put them on separate ranges, though. So there is still an administrative distinction between people who are pretrial. So detention centers, in my mind, are one of the most overlooked parts of the prison system and also the most important. They're where people who are denied bail are held in the harshest conditions of the entire Canadian prison system. All detention centers are considered maximum security. Burnside, they call it medium security, which is kind of silly. It looks exactly like these prisons. The rhythm is the same as the prisons in Ontario. And the numbers fluctuate, but according to a 2020 StatCan report, 72% of Ontario's prisoners and 71% of Nova Scotia's are waiting for trial. They have been denied bail. They're in remand custody is what it gets called. Not found guilty of anything yet. This rate of 70% pretrial custody is substantially worse than in the US. Canada loves to point its fingers, but in this case, we win the prize. And I could go on about this for a really long time, but this problem is due to Canada's really restrictive bail system that relies on supervision by sureties. Although this has been repeatedly condemned by the Supreme Court, the issue remains. Provincial judges have not been incorporating the Supreme Court rulings. This is a huge political problem that needs a political solution that isn't happening. If anything, we get this movement for more conservative, more restrictive bail reform that's been kind of going on in the last year. But yeah, I don't want to talk more about bail. If you want to talk more about it and complain about it, please find me at the end. As well, in detention centres, there are migrants who've been placed on immigration hold by the Canadian Border Service Agency. And I was surprised when I found out doing a little research that this issue has actually gotten worse in the last few years. According to a report by Human Rights Watch, before 2020, about 20% of people on immigration hold in Canada were placed in provincial prisons, but now it's 50%. In 2020, this represented 1,932 people across Canada, of which 1,066 were in Ontario. Although they're not there for criminal charges, their conditions are exactly the same as everyone else. So one interesting thing is, you might already know, Nova Scotia recently became the first province to stop holding immigration detainees in its jails. The practice was ended on August 8th of this year. So let's talk about conditions. These are the top images from the Toronto South Detention Centre. The bottom image is from the Elgin Middlesex Detention Centre, both in Ontario. The top image is more typical. More prisons look like that with the bunk beds rather than the beds side by side. So a couple of overviews as the conditions is that they're incredibly overcrowded. Triple bunking is the norm. So oftentimes these cells were built for one prisoner in the first place with one bunk, and then they came in and they added a bed above, and now there's a third person sleeping on the floor. So if you can picture that next to those bunk beds, a mattress on the floor with a third person. In my local jail, every single person is triple bunked unless they're in segregation. They suffer from frequent lockdowns, meaning that people are held inside of their cells and not allowed out into the day room. Whether this is due to staffing shortages or security concerns, they're incredibly common, and this includes in Nova Scotia based on news reports that I've read. And during lockdowns, prisoners are only allowed out of their cell for half an hour a day or an hour every second day. And they spend the rest of their time in the cells, which, due to triple bunking, you don't even have enough space to pace around. So I've talked to people who've spent weeks at a time just sitting on their mattress, just lying down on their mattress, and you can imagine how that aggravates physical and mental health conditions. I've heard people who've been trying to make progress in their lives or who've been dealing with chronic pain or health conditions have these incredible, awful periods of backsliding while they're locked up. During COVID, Ontario's prisons were in some form of lockdown for almost 2 years. During that period on our phone line, we were talking to people almost every single day, and it'd be hard to overstate how devastating this was. And prisoners didn't take it lying down. There were several mass hunger strikes, movements of refusal among prisoners against these kinds of conditions, because wherever there is oppression, people fight back, and that includes inside of provincial prisons in the least hospitable environment you could possibly imagine for that. There are no programs in detention centers, so half of all prisoners being held in a place where there's no addiction treatment, there's no mental health treatment, there is nothing. You just sit in your cell, or you're in a large concrete room with a television, and that's all. There's very limited access to books. In my local prison, until very recently, they had a couple hundred books for the whole institution, and they were all kept in one place where you couldn't get them. Yard time is very rare. Prisoners in provincial prisons are entitled to 20 minutes of outdoor time a day, but in many facilities this happens much less often. In my experience, and in that of many of the prisoners we talk to, you may only get yard a couple times a month. So visits are very short. You get 2 20-minute visits a week, and they're frequently canceled arbitrarily, and they're subject to lots of weird rules that are always changing. The access to books thing in particular has been a flashpoint in recent years. Like, prisoners have actually organized, like, hundreds of people in my local jail participated in a week-long hunger strike over access to books. So I think sometimes prisoners get looked at as being like folks who aren't interested in their own development, aren't interested in like education, but actually there's a huge hunger for just like knowledge and ways to pass the time that are productive. Because otherwise, as people put it, you just get involved in drama to pass the time instead. And unfortunately, detention centers are incredibly violent. Because everyone in a detention center is pre-trial, there's a high turnover and lots of coming and going. According to the ministry report I mentioned earlier, the average remand prisoner is held for 43 days, but some are held for years. A lot of the people we talk to on our phone line have been inside for years waiting for trial. Most people in remand are trying to get bail and are actively going to court dates, so they're entering and exiting the prison regularly. Stress is high, relationship and hierarchies are unstable, the needs of those who are there for longer are in conflict with those of new arrivals, and the level of violence and tension on some of these ranges is hard to describe. The criminal justice system tries to individualize situations of violence when it deals with them at all. It tries to fit them into the perpetrator-victim dichotomy. But violence between prisoners is a structural problem. It's a product of the conditions of incarceration. It's also more or less desirable, right? Like, how often in the public imagination does the association of prison with brutality just get lumped together as if it's kind of an intended part of what you're getting? It almost just gets talked about as like part of the deterrent, you know, part of the dissuasion. Guards are also able to brutalize prisoners with near impunity. I've seen numerous instances of this and have had many others reported to us while we monitor conditions, and I'm unaware of a single guard ever being sanctioned for their behavior. Out of literally, like, I've seen at least a dozen times of this happening, and not once has there been any consequences. There's a 2013 Ombudsman report in Ontario about the use of force by guards called The Code, named after the Guards' Code of Silence that prevents investigations from proceeding. I recommend looking into it if you don't believe me about guard brutality. So as a consequence of all this violence and all these bad conditions, in 2021, 29 people died in Ontario's provincial prisons. And this is an average stay of 43 days. They killed 29 people. From previous year's statistics compiled by Reuters, 2/3 of all deaths in provincial prisons in Canada were people in remand custody. And in Ontario, this percentage was even higher. About 85% of deaths in provincial prisons were in detention centers. All these issues also exist in Burnside and other prisons in Nova Scotia. So there's correctional centers, which, as you can tell from probably looking at these pictures, they are very, very similar to detention centers. The conditions for the huge majority of prisoners in correction centers are basically identical to those in detention centers. And many prisons are both detention center and correctional center, and they simply sort prisoners onto different ranges, like in Burnside. There are some small differences that are mostly based on the level of programming. So most sentenced ranges for people who've been sentenced will have access to kind of some general anger management or addiction courses or like trauma courses that might be available once a week. There are more social workers. You might be able to actually see one. And there's also access to some programming through correspondence. Like, otherwise, the only thing you get access to in a detention center is just Bible pamphlets you can mail in. There are also a small number of spots in treatment centers for people who've been sentenced to provincial time, and where there's more intensive programming around mental health or addiction, like literally a couple dozen. Some sentenced prisoners have access to education or will be given a job inside the jail. I made it onto a range where I was able to take high school courses at one point. Again, people are in for short times, so mostly you don't finish it. It's just like a thing to do with your days, just mess around with a graphing calculator or something. And these courses are administered by local school boards. There are also access to some jobs for correctional centers, and it's all just institutional jobs, like helping the jail run. And these include laundry, kitchen, cleaning, but prisoners are not paid in any real way. What is called pay is actually just a couple of chocolate bars or a bag of chips a week. This is true everywhere. It might also include some informal privileges, like they'll turn a blind eye while you smoke cigarettes or something. They sometimes get longer visits, 40 minutes instead of 20, and the rhythm of the day might be a bit less strict. Like, there might be periods where your door swings, like where you can open or close it as you want to. Generally speaking, they're more stable, there's less violent, they're less moving around, generally more survivable. And one big difference is that prisoners in correctional centers are eligible for parole, meaning they can get released early under supervision. There's a handful of medium security ranges scattered across the province where the actual prison structure is different. This is just a quick overview of conditions. I hope the aspects I focused on were useful. I spent so much time getting into the weeds around this that it can be hard to know what's important with a bit of distance. So feel free to ask more questions about conditions later, like, hey, I'm a criminal, ask me anything. I'm down to answer. Let's see what else we got. So prison functions on the basis of separation. Separation allows prisons to create different kinds of incarceration, exposing different groups of people to different kinds of treatment. Put another way, separation and differentiated treatment allow the prison system to produce different groups of people. The tendency these days is to create new forms of separation in order to create more groups of prisoners that can be treated differently. Firstly, the prison system separates individuals from their community, exposing them to dehumanization in the prison system and exclusion once released. This produces a class of people who are criminals or prisoners. It then sorts prisoners into administrative groupings based on where they are in the process, as we've seen. This produces different groups of people like lifers, the not criminally responsible, and those who are willing to participate through treatment, work, or education, and those who are too recalcitrant or undeserving. There's a couple of other ways that prison sorts people. There's protective custody versus general population, there's gang affiliation, but I want to talk about the big one, which is gender or sex. Officially, all prisoners are labeled either male or female based on the prison system's best guess of your sex at birth, and there's two gendered forms of incarceration known as men or women's prison. Trans identity is accommodated in a very kind of surface-light way by adding a transgender alert to a person's file with any kind of specific information about like where they go or how they're treated. I find it useful to think about women's prison as being a prison for people who would be at risk of gender-based violence in men's prison. Though there's still trans women who do their time in men's prison, it's much less common than it was the case 5 or 6 years ago when gender identity was added as a protected category in 2017. Officially, there's little difference between men and women's prisons, but it's worth reflecting on how identical treatment within an unequal system produces drastically different results. This happens on a lot of levels, like access to exercise, surveillance, the absence of privacy, measures designed to prevent the concealment of drugs, food portions, relationships to male guards, the involvement of child protection services. To give just a quick example, the food in men and women's prison is exactly the same. In men's prison, this is mostly felt to be insufficient, in part because working out is a big part of prisoner culture. Men prisoners are often really stronger and fitter than when they went in. In women's prison, exercise is discouraged, both by prisoner culture and by the guards. Women prisoners often experience rapid weight gain and a general decrease in fitness due to the enforced immobility. I'm going to just kind of skip over this quickly, but I want to talk about just gendered forms of harm that result in this. So I talked about health as being one consequence, but what this diagram is getting at is the work exclusion from feminized sectors. So if you can think about the consequences of having a criminal record, consider the way the childcare sector deals with having a criminal record versus trucking or social work versus, construction. Women tend to experience more exclusion from the workforce, resulting in forms of dependence, victimization, and cycles of criminalization. Whereas in men's prison, you get these kind of bad conditions with a macho prisoner culture, homophobia, misogyny, lots of PTSD, and then this gets exported back out into communities, producing, again, these cycles of criminalization. So I've only got a second left, but why does this matter to the homelessness sector? The prison system leaves a lot of people homeless and undermines the housing stability of everyone it affects, while also compounding problems with physical and mental health, addiction, and trauma that are all risk factors for homelessness. And inversely, people who are homeless have worse outcomes at every step of the legal process, from being denied bail to receiving harsher sentences. And as someone who's been through it, I know that the way the provincial prison system works and how it affects people is not well understood within society at large, or even among service providers, which creates barriers to service and makes it less likely that former prisoners will choose to access services or get their needs met if they do. There's also a pretty major issue of social justice here, that when we understand the actual prison conditions, it's very easy to say things like black people are disproportionately incarcerated. It's different to say black people are disproportionately locked up 3 to a cell and held for weeks at a time without being able to move and are fed inadequate food that destroys their health. And I think we can actually get away from some of these kind of tidy language about incarceration and overrepresentation when we look more closely at what we're talking about. So that's it, that's all. Thank you so much for listening. I'm trying to take some pretty painful experiences and turn them into something valuable, and that feels powerful to me, so thank you for participating in that. Feel free to get in touch by email if you have any questions about this talk, and again, I'll be outside after the session if anyone needs to debrief.
Thank you so much, Cedar. Yeah. I'll invite up our next speaker, Jupy Bowen, presenting on provider stigma, the culture of non-disclosure and professionalism.
Hi. Yeah, so I actually changed the title. And the whole presentation. Joke's on you, we're doing my stand-up. No. Hi, my name is Jupy Bowen. Provider stigma and the culture of professionalism and wounded healing is what I changed it to, because I was kind of steering away from using that phrase at first because I was like, it's kind of woo-woo, and I'm from the States. So like a lot of people like in healthcare, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear big words. And I'm not an academic, so I don't have that. Well, I have big words, but I just don't feel the need to flex them. You know what I mean? Who cares? First things first, I live and work on the unceded territory of the Council of the Three Fires. That is the Potawatomi, the Ottawa, and the Chippewa peoples, otherwise known as Chicago, Illinois, United States. Giving land back to its original stewards, which is all of us, everyone in this room, we're indigenous to planet Earth, is paramount to ending homelessness globally. I also, what I have written down doesn't always match this, but we'll figure it out. Like this peer health navigation part, apparently like y'all already really have that here. So like pat yourselves on the back because y'all are about 50 years ahead of the States in the terms of giving people with lived experience paid positions with like benefits and like transit and health FSAs and stuff that everybody should get. Or any standard employee. A little bit about me, but we're going to spend like 10 minutes talking about me. So, yeah. But I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up between Florida, Georgia, and New York City. It makes for an interesting personality. I am the eldest daughter in an immigrant family. If you relate, you relate. I'm trying to think of what else I put here. I work for Chicago House and Social Services. It's an agency that started out as a hospice in 1985 during not the height of the AIDS crisis, but at the very beginning of the AIDS crisis, as a hospice for gay men, and has now expanded it to have employment services, trans-specific services, housing services, and medical case management. My side of things is in the scattered site housing department. So I house people in their own buildings. We have residential buildings that like the agency owns, but my department puts people in their like own one bedroom or what have you. We deal with all the leasing, we deal with the landlords, but we also keep them connected to their medical care. So wraparound services to a T. But yeah, the thing that makes me a little different is, besides that I'm up here with like a bleached head, I don't know, is that I'm a case manager with a high school diploma and like 3 years of credits. Most people working in healthcare in general, but definitely in case management, have a master's and an LCSW. I don't care for any of those things. I kind of knew early on, like, I wanted to get my experience from living my life and getting a job. James Baldwin inspired me to do that. But that being said, it's very isolating. It's not like being here where there's, like, a push towards, like, peer-led stuff. I'm the only person at my job. Well, I'm not the only person, but I'm the only person in my department, let me rephrase that has lived experience of homelessness, and I don't share it with anyone. It's quite liberating to be on a mic. Thank you. So yeah, like I don't talk to my supervisor about it. Nobody. So I'll start by going through some of my lived experience of homelessness. My kind of journey, I don't know if it does that. I've been housing secure for 15 months. Everybody clap. And I work with formerly homeless HIV plus positive populations. That's an important detail. Furthering research by doing this towards more holistic care globally by telling my story. We'll get to that in a second after I do this bit. But in December of 2019, I was living in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. It had come to me and my 16 roommates, go New York, attention that one of our housemates had been using our rent money to buy drugs. So we were about, I think we were $15,000 in the hole. Yeah, is right. Yeah, me too, girl. So we had to collectively scrounge 15 grand. And all of us are like, we're working entry-level jobs. I was like canvassing for Greenpeace, making like $16 an hour. Like, so, that's, not in my pocket. But then, so we figured that out. But then COVID hit, like 6 months, not even, like 4 months later. Most of my housemates lost income, and that's when we had to really hunker down and just go ahead and say, like, a rent strike has to happen. For us personally, but it was also us being a part of, like, a nation, state, and citywide push for that, because COVID hit. But that experience taught me everything I know about housing. It taught me everything I know about organizing. It taught me everything that I can bring and speak to you here. I got from the like communal learning, the community work of struggling with other people, and that is just not something that you go and get a master's for. I wouldn't recommend getting a master's and getting evicted, personally. It's not sexy. Hold on. So basically how that, just to give you a little glimpse into like how getting evicted works and like the housing, or like what happened with our strike, our landlords pitted us against each other. So there was upstairs and downstairs. I live in downstairs. Upstairs, it's a more wealthy group. They have access to generational wealth. Most, if not all of them, had co-signers. So our landlords took advantage of that fact to be like, hey, give us our $15,000 or however much it was, or we're going to sue your parents. And basically, they picked their parents and their like generational wealth over the lives and homes of 8 people. I think about my old bedroom every day. Let me see. So that resulted in June 20th, 2020, the day after Juneteenth. I basically fled for ATL with Atlanta, with everything I could fit in a checked bag and my cat. And I was very hopeful for the plan that I had. I thought I had secured some housing with a friend, but when I moved in with that friend, after like 2 weeks, they basically were like, I don't know, they saw how bad my situation was and kicked me out. So then I stayed with a family friend. I had a roof over my head, but I was still getting like emotionally abused. I talk about domestic violence a few times because those two things kind of coincide with homelessness in general, but also with my experience. But I'm not going to go into too much detail because I will get very activated, if you will. Let's see. So yeah. So that resulted in me, after leaving that situation, couch hopping with different people. At one time, I did not know that couch hopping was a form of homelessness because I had a roof over my head, and I thought the people I was staying with were my friends. They weren't. That's another story for another day, or we can talk about it later. I love to chat shit about my past. But yeah, in exchange for favors, which I will not go into, but like you get the gist. So I experienced what I can only call like communal IPV at that point. I was basically a part of like a scene of people that were like just all kicking me down together. I don't really know like a really like intelligent way to say that. That ended with in February of 2022 me going to the hospital for homicidal and suicidal thoughts. I'm open with you with that because just like I probably don't look like somebody that might kill somebody, or If you think I killed someone, raise your hand. Just kidding. Just kidding. That'd be really funny. I would be like, I like you. Which we call it. But yeah, I went to the hospital, and basically my choices at that point were to go inpatient or to move to another city. And I'm a Sagittarius, so you know I love to leave. So that was the point where I was like, I can't afford to go back to New York. I also couldn't afford to live in Atlanta because Atlanta and New York are actually just as expensive. Fun fact. So I moved to Chicago, which was a city I had never been to, and just tried to figure it out from there. That was April of 2022. But then I moved into a slumlord's building. So in a really not great neighborhood with an apartment that had black mold, which still affects my left lung. I had predatory male neighbors and their wives who co-signed their behavior. There were lead pipes, which is crazy. Bed bugs, and a very threatening landlord who would like show up at my place randomly and stuff. And I'm still considering suing him because the statute of limitations is not up and I have time now. Fuck that guy. So I finally moved into my current apartment after securing my job on 11/1 of 2022. And now I talked about my housing streak. And I got that job because of my lived experience, which is not something that my agency had done before. My director, Garrett White, really took a chance on me, and I think that really goes to show that the decision of one person really can make a lot of change, because I'm standing in front of you right now. Yeah, so let's see where I'm at. Sorry, I'm like going off paper. But yeah, so what if we saw stories like mine in everybody? Because I'm sure all of you have a story from your life that would make me like boo-hoo cry, okay? So what if we saw that as like more of a skill and something that can be like turned into a tool? And what if we had the infrastructure to bolster these stories as like qualifiers and support people in being vulnerable in their work? Because this current culture that we have as like helping professionals of like, I am the rock and you are like I'm helping you and molding you into something, like that kind of idea. I don't think research shows it doesn't make clients feel seen. It doesn't make them feel like they can open up if they feel like they're talking to a wall. That being said, there's exceptions to that. Some people do just want a clean slate, so nuance is important to take into account here. But yeah, so honestly, I have minimal solutions. I have like mostly questions, but they're questions for you to like sit with, and, bring the nuance of yourself into. But that being said, into the kind of like more professional part, I'll get to that in a second. But actually, no, I won't. I'll get to it now. So many of you probably know about the social determinants of health in healthcare. I kind of rephrase it to say the social determinants of one's future, even though it's kind of the same thing. But kind of like what I talked about at the beginning, like think of the many layers of privilege that it takes to even be aware that master programs exist. I'm not even talking about getting into one. Like I grew up middle class, so like I know that that's like an option, right? But like the people that I'm working with, like that's just not how they're thinking. So then the next level of that okay, you're aware, now getting into something like a master's program, paying for it, what have you, this is extremely unattainable to the people that we're working with. But the people that we're working with have like the most nuanced experience, Do you see? Cool. What else is there? So yeah, these layers of privilege can manifest as disidentification. And if you know the history of social work, it's a lot of like upper middle class white ladies like going into disadvantaged communities to kind of pat themselves on the back. Quite frankly, I don't really know a nice way to put it. And the way that affects, what that causes is like a white savior complex. So that's kind of like rampant everywhere, and that really needs to change to make social work more like synergistic. Hold on. So it's gonna have to start with supervision. It's gonna have to start with a back end thing of like people who do supervise helping professionals. Figuring out what it means exactly to support somebody through something like countertransference or transference with a client. I think when we think of like countertransference and transference, people think of I'm in love with my therapist type transference, but also the transference that's like my client said something that really like hit a nerve with me. Now what do I do about it? I'm just supposed to go home? Like that's not fair to me, I think sitting with those type of feelings and not having anywhere for them to go as like a practitioner, it can inhibit your practice. It can make you like kind of sink into yourself a bit more. Just my thoughts. But yes, exploring modes of supervision that support a provider's emotional health and overall well-being, and redefining what personal boundaries mean. Because boundaries are still important, but can vulnerability be a boundary? Maybe. So let's see. So yeah, this type of transformative work can create exponential good, in my opinion. So how this ties into like client and provider relationships, because the general consensus is that this is bad. Like I was at a partner abuse training, and the guy running it at one point got a question about disclosure with clients, and he said it was collusion. He compared it to collusion, which is like, right? That's like really harsh and like punitive, and I felt like I was getting chastised for like even asking. But basically, like at least in the States, I think the understanding is that like you are not there to talk about you, and I can see where that's coming from, but it's not collusion. Let me see. Disclosure / positive transference can help a client to feel that you're a human being within the very sterile systems that they're dealing with every day. These bright lights, these people that like couldn't be bothered to like be at their job. That's a lot of what our clients are dealing with, and it affects their adherence. It affects like if they're gonna show up to your next appointment. It affects all of that. And most people who enter social work have some sort of lived experience, so why not build off that? Let's see. Keeping all of our pain and experience to ourselves promotes self-stigma and stigma towards the client, which then comes out as disidentification. Kind of talking in circles a little bit. Sorry, y'all. As we've seen here, what have we seen? Sorry, friends. Yeah, sorry, my little thing. I'm like completely going off of it. Let me see. Peer support workers dull a dual-edged sword, that of the unemployment rates of homeless or previously homeless populations, and adherence to treatment, as well as like general like professional well-being. So things like service plans or care plans, I feel like if you're having that, like, I don't want to use the word intimacy. If you're having that type of like closeness with the client, it can be more conducive to like a more fleshed out plan, as opposed to just like, I don't know, I just want to do whatever you want to do. Because I know at least at my agency, we come from like a harm reduction perspective where we value the client's lived experience before anything. So if a client can see that you've gotten through the same thing that they're in, it can remind them that they're not alone. It can increase feelings of like hope and like, oh, maybe I can get through this, because as we all know, homelessness is probably one of the most isolating things you can go through in life. So let's see. Maybe I have the time. Do you know what time it is? Oh, okay, cool. Nice. But yeah, we all have a hard luck story that we could use as a tool, and where can we all be more vulnerable as examples to each other? I was going to talk about Carl Jung and wounded healing, or I am talking about wounded healing, but I was going to bring Carl Jung into it. But really, I think who like kind of not coined, but like especially in Canada has like made this a thing is Indigenous people, wounded healers and like shamans and stuff. Like it's been about 2,500 years of like recorded history of them being like extremely valuable members of their communities, and the way that they do that is like by going and sitting with their pain, figuring out like what they need so that they can help other people. I'm not going to talk about peer health navigators because y'all have so many of them, and there was a really good presentation I went to yesterday that went really deep into it. But in the U.S., where I have seen this is actually at my own, I didn't put it on here, but my own agency, because of me, is adding a peer health navigator position that's opening up in the fall. But also in Chicago at UIC, the OPENS program for disabled peer health navigators helps folks navigate like the SSI system and other aspects of the healthcare system that have like, all those trap doors, all that paperwork that people have to do, all this fine print. It helps to have somebody who's just already done it like successfully just alongside you doing it. And it increases like success rates, if you will, of people getting into the programs they need or getting the services that they need. I've also seen this in Florida with HIV peer health navigators. So those are folks that might help people with HIV figure out what meds work best for them, because there's so much antiretroviral medication now, which is great, but it can be really confusing for folks. And also just counseling for like what it can be like living as a person with HIV just in the world, because I do kind of feel like, there's a new, more popular disease in town, so people aren't really talking about HIV as much. But I think this is the end. But yeah, what if we saw vulnerability as a skill? How could that aid healing? What are wounded parts of yourself that you could use to support others? And in what ways are you closed off from your practice? Those are kind of the questions I will leave with you to just kind of meditate on. And how will this aid in ending homelessness? Homelessness and employment go hand in hand. Even without, obviously you need money to, get a place, but also just the time spent doing something else, like talking to other people. A lot of my clients, we pay for their housing so they're good, but then they're just in their house alone all the time and calling me like I'm their friend. And then that's a transference moment too, when you have to be like, yeah, we're not buds, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm your evidence. I couldn't be here without my job, but also Jane, hi. Whatchamacallit? I think that's the end. That was a really awkward way to end. Yay, it's done. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our awesome presenters, sharing different pieces of lived experience. And I think what you both shared is about how our lived experiences can be powerful tools for systemic change and for collective education. I'm wondering if folks have questions. Jupi has shared some questions for reflection, and we have about 45 minutes in our session, which is fantastic. That means we can have a really good conversation. So I just want to open it up and see if anyone... Yeah.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your life experience. And I was quite shocked seeing a couple of numbers in Ontario. Yesterday, I had a privilege to ask a question, but I didn't get the proper answer because of the fire alarm. I was more into we talk a lot about the homelessness, housing, wraparound, but one of the key components that the invisible homelessness that I asked, and I didn't get a chance to get the answer. I'll give you an example of Toronto, that having so many new refugees or the new Canadians, they are all ended up in shelter. And when you see it, out of 7,500 prisoners in the Ontario, 50% are the immigrant. That blows my mind, because they ended up in a jail. Now what about their life in terms of the documentation? Will they going to be reported back? So I'm a little shocked here. If you can give us more insight into what next step those are doing. And one final thing that I had a chance to say in another session, I would like to request the Canadian Alliance of Ending the Homelessness to make a marker one day, October 10th, just get everyone on a street based on individual potential, whether you do activism or write a petition, go to school, whatever, but we need that day to highlight the importance of the issue that we are dealing with. That's my request and the question that I asked. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Just to clarify, maybe I didn't express it clearly, but So there's 7,500 total prisoners in Ontario at any given time. But what I said was that, or what I hoped to say, is that of all the people who are held in immigration detention, which is a smaller number, half of those people are in provincial. So it's not half of 7,500. It's so because they've got these separate federally run immigration prisons. So for instance, there's like a good-sized one outside of Toronto that has space for about 200 people in it. But everybody who's in the area who is above that 200-person cap just ends up in the provincial prison system. So there's about 300 people in the kind of Greater Toronto area who are held on immigration hold in provincial prisons right now. So oftentimes people end up in that situation because they got caught for some kind of minor crime while they were in a precarious status, right? So if you don't have permanent residency and you get arrested, basically that revokes your visa. And if it doesn't revoke it, you can't apply for a new visa while you have outstanding charges. So if you're juggling together visitor permits or work permits, you can't apply for a new work permit while you have an outstanding charge. So it does just create this form of precarity. Like I was doing time with this one woman who was in on a shoplifting charge after having been in Canada for several years. She got caught like literally stealing from like a gift shop in a bus station and was now looking at being deported to Romania. And yeah, it's just the kind of nonsense that people then have to deal with. And like the reason she was ultimately going to get deported is because her papers expired while she was locked up. So suddenly she was just without status. I was in with another person who was fighting deportation to Hungary, who was trying so hard to get moved to one of the immigration detention centers because of the better conditions. Because when you're in provincial, you can't communicate with anyone. Like until very recently in Ontario, all you could do on the phone was make collect calls to landlines. Who has a landline, right? And still, if you don't have money, and this person had no money, like she didn't have a friend on the outside putting money on her account, you still can't make direct phone calls to cell phones. You still can only make calls to landlines. So a lot of the people, especially migrant folks, who maybe don't have their family and support networks in Canada, who aren't able to come by the jail and drop off money, are going to be stuck in this position where they can't call anyone. They can't line up the kinds of housing that would allow them to get out. They can't contact immigration lawyers. Like they can't do this work in an effective way. So she was trying so hard to get transferred, but they wouldn't transfer her until her criminal matter was resolved, which was a minor drug possession thing that most Canadians wouldn't even get prosecuted for. So just these like nightmares that folks who are on immigration hold have to deal with. And so I think it's striking to me that provinces are starting to refuse to hold immigration detainees. I think, like I said, Nova Scotia has led the charge on that. There's been a couple of other provinces. And Ontario, the classic reactionary province of Canada, is taking up the slack and is just kind of gleefully building more prisons to house more people. So, I mean, hopefully we'll see a movement in Ontario against the construction of new prisons, and I hope one of the reasons for that is because these are racist prisons that are made to punish migrants. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentations, and both of you for the important experiences that you're bringing to our group here. My question, in particular for Cedar, I was thinking about some of the work I do in Winnipeg is around our point-in-time count of homelessness. And one of our data sources that we've used in the past, we weren't able to use it in the previous street census, but in 2018 we were able to connect with Manitoba Justice and get data about who was being released into homelessness. And so we'd get a list of addresses where people were being released to. And so many of the people that we talked to, or didn't speak to, we had data on, were being either released to no fixed address or being released into an address that we knew was a homelessness shelter. And I was wondering if you could reflect on that and what we can do to ensure people are not being released into those situations, but really being released into a more stable housing situation.
That's a great question. Do you want to speak to that at all?
So if I'm understanding your question, how systemically can we ensure that folks are not being released into nothing?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it's a really big issue, especially in housing first programs. Like one of the ones on my job, it's only 2 years, but then it's like after those 2 years, question mark. That's like really tough. We don't have a lot, definitely not in the States, we don't have a lot of like the transitional housing that we need, because that could be an option of like having an address of like I don't know if halfway house is the worst word, but like somewhere just for them to stay until something else gets figured out. That is a very big missing piece in the system. So I honestly don't have an answer for you, but I have that.
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces there. I think with the counting and collecting the accurate data, that's really interesting. I haven't heard of anybody having data like that before. That's really cool that you're actually able to look at a list of addresses. I wonder about it because sometimes, like personally, even when I have an address, like I've been released into homelessness like a couple of times, but even when I have an address, I always just say I don't have one when I'm getting released because I don't want to tell the prison system where I live. So I can imagine getting people to trust to participate in these kinds of studies would be like a big hurdle. And I can imagine that would just involve some like relational work, right? Like, because oftentimes, like when I've been in prison, usually I don't see anyone, like I don't have any contact with any staff or anything. Like nobody meets with you before you get out. Like I don't ever see the social worker. Yeah, you just chill there, and then eventually one day somebody comes and yells your name, and you just get released from the prison, and like literally you get given a bus ticket. You can choose where your bus ticket's to, though, so that's very exciting. In terms of preventing that, I mean, I feel like, so again, like the average stay being 45 days, that's long enough for almost anybody to lose their housing, right? Even folks who own their home, like when we're operating the prisoner support line, one of the unfortunately really common things that we're doing is helping people get in touch with their bank so they can sell their house or like try to beg for more time to make their mortgage payments. Or people who are like desperately trying to call a moving company to go to their rental house and move their stuff into a storage locker before they lose their home. Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking. It happens over and over again. It's almost an intended part of the process, right? Like destroying people's lives is just part of what the system is made to do. So it's really, there's not an obvious way to plug in to prevent that from happening. But I would say it needs to start like a little bit upstream from that and be considered by the justice system as like a consequence that is like deserving of consideration, in the same way that like things like substance use or mental health during the sentencing period can be considered. That like I think housing situation and things like having like responsibilities over children and dependents, like another one of the gendered forms of harm that I didn't get to is just talking about the fact that folks in women's prison usually have more dependents and therefore have these like additional needs for their housing, right? And so the consequence of losing housing is often that much more so. Because even just if you didn't already lose your kids by getting locked up, you definitely will if you end up homeless as well, So I think some consideration a little bit upstream. And I think also is, I think there's very few services that focus on prisoner stuff, so I'm hesitant to ask the services that do anything different. Like literally there's like 2 or 3 agencies in most places that do anything related to prisoners, but they all focus on federal. They focus on people who are in for a long time, which again is like a tiny minority of, not tiny, it's like a small minority of people who are affected by the prison system as a whole, right? When you've got 100,000 people, 150,000 people who are cycling through these 45-day stays losing their housing, it's looking at these folks who are in for years and do face these really big challenges and deserve support, but that is not the bulk of the problem. And right now, the very few resources that exist are going towards that. Whereas like the homelessness factory is happening at the provincial level, it's happening in the pre-trial custody. Most people do all of their time pre-trial when there's no services, when there is no social worker, when nobody pays attention to what you're doing, when there is no release planning, because you're getting released through the courts, right? You're getting released on a court order. So it's not even like the correctional system could intervene there. Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, like personally, the world that I dream of as an abolitionist is a world in which like communities are strong enough to address harm in a different way. And I think one of the things that comes with that is being able to meet the needs of people who have committed harm, and not just understanding that they're to be like completely kicked to the margins and like excluded and punished in every possible way. But I think just like looking at what it takes to like make a situation right probably also involves people who've committed harm being able to get back on their feet. So that's maybe my dream. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say thank you to both of you for your presentations. I think they were both amazing. Cedar, my question is for you. I'm also very, very passionate about everything you presented on, and you kind of just mentioned it and touched on it. But in terms of like abolition, you always get the question of like, but then what? Like, then what will you do? And I mean, obviously, I have my own thoughts, but I would be curious to hear you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that, please.
Cool. You want to take this one first? Do you want to talk about it?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go for it.
So what does abolition look like for us personally? Babe. Abolition to me looks like not viewing anybody as disposable. You know, I recently took in the training where that guy called being cool with your client's collusion. It was actually a partner abuse training, which is the other side of the coin of victims training in domestic violence. So that means I'm working to work with the folks who have perpetrated. That's the word they use, but the folks that have caused harm. So that's kind of my first, kind of, I guess we have a shared idea. Abolitionism to me also looks like UBI. It looks like giving people the money they need to survive, at least, so they don't have to do things that will have them end up in the system, like selling drugs, sex work, anything, the list. Abolition to me looks like free food. It looks like such broad things. I think about this a lot, but like, if everybody has conditions that are conducive to just being human and being alive, they wouldn't have to do the things that often get people ended up in prison in the first place, you know?
Yeah. No, totally. And while I'm imagining like worlds that I want to live in, I imagine a world in which things are way less like unitary and one size fits all, right? So I feel like I imagine many abolitions and like many different communities coming up with their own ways of like addressing these things. And in terms of answering this question in like a practical way, like one question I try to ask is how do we unmake this system? And in doing so, how does the way that we do that produce a world that we actually want to live in? So one way that I try to do that in my life is through this prisoner support work, prisoner solidarity work. And our goal is not to become advocates. Our goal is not to engage in lobbying. Our goal is to support the self-organizing of the prisoner class in order to for them to become stronger and more empowered in themselves and to be released feeling like they're like respected and part of something and know that they're worth something. Because to me that's like the biggest way to interrupt cycles is just to have humanity restored, right? Rather than just getting treated like literally the shit on society's shoe, that you come out feeling like you matter to people, you have the ability to make a difference. Because I think just like the ability, the people who are most failed by the system are often folks who've been harmed and haven't had that harm be addressed by the systems in place, and then also people who've experienced harm because of the system who sometimes are both, right? Often, if not always both. I think they end up with a lot of insight about why the system has failed, and then oftentimes people in criminalized communities are already in practice living in systems in which you can't call the cops, in which like sending people to prison is not a real option, in which like being a snitch is not a thing to be. And so I think these solutions are already getting sketched out, and some of the solutions really suck, right? Like, I don't necessarily want to live in a society where instead of justice we have macho dudes who carry out revenge on each other. But I also think we can do better than that as like we begin to unmake these systems and reduce the criminalization, reduce the need for like survival crime and like forms of kind of horizontal violence that happen within communities. So I think, yeah, just like redistribution, empowerment, self-organizing, autonomy, struggle, all of these things lay the groundwork for a world without prisons and a world without the justice system. I think sometimes we let the justice system off the hook, but like honestly, if anybody bugs me the most, it's judges. And just these like smug people who wear robes to work, who sit up there and just like take people's housing away, take people's children away, take people's freedom away all day long, running it through the machine. And I think there's a total lack of imagination there, right? Like we delegate our power to those people. We delegate our ability to deal with conflict, which is such a fundamental part of being a human being, is dealing with situations that are difficult. And we just get treated like children by the system as if we can't deal with our own situations, right? I can deal with my own situations, so can you. We may not be able to deal with them by ourselves, but I think if we start rebuilding strong enough communities that we can do this. So I want to steal conflict back. I want to reappropriate conflict from the justice system and deal with it within communities.
Can we get some snaps for that? Oh my gosh, you two. That was incredible. This is why we're here. Holy smokes.
I was gonna echo one last thing with that about imagination. All of the work we're trying to do starts in your brain. I think I don't know what people expect actually. It is just like wake up in a utopia. But it's like the work starts in your brain and seeing a system outside of judges, outside of having to call the police, outside of literally everything that we're living in.
Hello, my name's Christine. First, I wanted to say thank you to both of you. As somebody who has experienced prison systems in the city of Edmonton from the age of 18 to 25, most of it being survival crime while using substances, within all of that 7 years in and out of prison systems, I have experienced 23-hour-a-day lockup in Calgary for several months. And I've also spent over 1 month in segregation wearing a baby doll without access to a bathroom, basic needs such as food. And this is only one piece of many experiences while being in prison that has caused great harm and trauma. I just wanted to say I really love how you highlight that prison systems perpetuate houselessness, as every single time I was released from prison, I had zero transitional plans in regards to where I was going to go when my prison sentence ended. In working in this field for over 5 years, I continue to see this happening as I live currently by the new remand center. And I still see people being released with a bus ticket and walking down the highway. It's more of a comment, less than a question. But most of the time when I got released from prison, my go-to was my drug dealer because he showed up. I would love to connect and further share stories. And again, thank you for opening up this conversation and having this dialogue, because I feel like we could probably talk about it for hours. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being down to just identify and share your story. That's really powerful. I'd love to connect at the end if you want to.
So I'm Shane Moyer. I'm from North Bay. I spent pretty much the better part of my life in and out of jails and institutions, pretty much about 35 to 37 years. The biggest problem we're facing today in the correction system is health care. People are not getting the health care that they're needing. The last time I was in jail, we had 7 people on our range end up with food poisoning. One guy ended up with irritable bowel syndrome. While in the inside, he was not getting looked at. He was giving himself, using a pop bottle, he was giving himself daily enemas to be able to go to the bathroom. The food, he was not able to consume the food because it would block him up. So he was not getting the proper care that he needs. And this is one of the biggest issues that we have when it comes to inmate and prisoner abuse inside the system. Aside from the abuse from the guards, you can't, in some systems, you cannot approach the guards. You have to go through chain of command of your fellow prisoners in order to get stuff from the Ministry of from the correctional guards or from the facility. This is another ongoing problem that we have, because then they take any supplies that supposed to come in for the other individuals and they hoard them. They hang on to them, and people are getting, the necessary supplies that they need in order to send out letters, or to even, if you're on assistance or you're a statistic like me, most of my time that I spent, I never had any money in my canteen, so I wasn't, like you said, phone calls are non-existent. There's no more landlines. Landlines are done. So how do you get in touch with your family in order to? You can't. One of the statistics we had in North Bay, a gentleman was getting bounced around from institution to institution. He was in on a domestic for 2 years. And and because of the language barrier and many things, they just kept bouncing around. They just left him in the dark. He had no idea as to what was going on within the court as far as his proceedings, because he couldn't understand the language barrier there, which is a big problem. Inmates aren't getting the food like we used to get back earlier in the years when we had the farms open. Yeah. Now you want to talk about corrections? We had corrections back then because the inmates were working the farms. They were supporting the other institutions with fresh beef, fresh vegetables. What they're not getting today. And since the Harris government shut down the prison farms that we did have in '95, our institutionals have gone so much downhill. They're dirty, they're filthy. People have no self-worth. There's been more suicide attempts, more suicide deaths. They're just not, people aren't being cared for like they were, and there is no form of rehabilitation inside the correction system. The correction system has done away with all that. Yard is pretty much non-existent. It's been 42 days in lockup in CNCC with no shower, non-existent. They come in, they strip search you, they do everything to you to make you feel less than a human being. Yeah. And this is what we face. And it's not just happening in the provincial system or anything like that. It also happens within the immigration system as well. The living conditions are very poor. Food is less than substandard. And we need to somehow try and find to make a change in order to bring some of these programs back that was taken away. Along with, the alternative sentencing. We used to have different types of alternative sentencing back in the 70s. Your first time in jail, you had a choice. You either do your time or we'll put you in the military, and you do your time in the military. Make something out of yourself. Our government took that away back in 1970. I think it was 76. They took that away. And then, like I said, in '95, the Harris government did away with the farms. And the thing is, with our farms, when we had our farms, they weren't only supporting the institution, but any access left that didn't get dispersed out to the institution got dispersed out into the community. It costs our taxpayers about 5 times to 7 times more today to house one inmate than it did when I first started doing time.
I wanted to react to the piece about health, if that's okay. Yeah, because I think what you're saying about the health system doesn't get enough attention, and that it's absolutely violence through neglect that's going on inside of these places. And to make the link back to housing, I think we all know about the way that health and access to adequate treatment is a determinant for housing and homelessness, right? And I think that when you're putting people in a situation where their mental health medication is being considered a narcotic, and so they can't have it, and so instead they're being just given high doses of nightmare medication instead of antipsychotics, or if instead of I don't know, there's lots of examples I could get into, instead of anti-anxiety medication, they're just getting given sleeping pills, and what this does to people over time. And like your friend or the person you described with irritable bowel syndrome, like I feel like I've seen things like that before, of like just people being allowed to have their conditions degrade. Like there's one of the people we talk to regularly on the phone line has ended up in the hospital repeatedly due to like leg swelling due to inadequate diabetic food. And then when that person gets out, I know he moves into an encampment. And you know, he's an amazing person. He's an advocate inside the prison. Like he helps do prisoner organizing. He's an advocate when he's living in encampments. But his health gets in the way of him actually finding housing, and he's very like clear about this, is that by destroying his health systematically, the prison system is keeping him in a cycle of poverty, homelessness, and criminalization. It really goes together.
It's a revolving door.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, all of you. I just wanted to share that I work for a 2S LGBTQ community center, and in our job descriptions, it says, you know, what do you need to do this job, and it says certain things about education, but it also always includes that people like or equivalent lived experience and life experience. And all of the people at our organization, not every single person is within community, but we do have this idea that we are community too. And so many of the folks that I work with are like, they were volunteers first and they're newcomers and they don't necessarily have the specific educational qualifications that we would consider in a community-based organization, but they're brilliant and they're doing amazing work. Or they were service users before they became part of the staff team. And so it just made me think, like, I just wanted to affirm that this idea that JP put forward, like, it works in practice, and like our staff team is also the evidence. And so I wanted to, that all was more of a statement, but I just also wanted to throw back this idea. I was wondering if you could go back to your questions, because I wanted, you know, if we could think about, I wanted to hear from both of you, like, these ideas of sort of instituting or like the framework of vulnerability as community service work. And I also wanted to suggest or ask the people in this space if you could also consider, you know, not just as a concept what these questions might be, but like, how do these questions apply to your work, and like, where can you find them in the work that you do after this conference? How can you bring these brilliant questions to your work teams and not just think, oh yeah, that was a cool thing I heard one time on a Thursday, but actually, you know, when you're talking about your time here, asking your colleagues, like, what are the wounded parts of ourselves that we could use to support each other, and how can we support each other as colleagues to do that in a safe way and not, yeah. There's a question in there somewhere, but just some thoughts on that. Yeah.
I see it. Yeah, I'll answer my own questions. What you said was great also. And the ways that I've used vulnerability as a skill in my work, I guess just as an example, I come from lived experience of homelessness, but also sex work, substance abuse, alcoholism, a lot of the things that you experience when you're a racialized, marginalized person in the United States of America, I have been through because I look like me, right? One example of that is I have a client who currently participates in survival sex work, and I know for me, I'm disclosing it to you now because I'm like at work, right? But it's not the type of thing I talk about people with normally. But if I'm receiving a service, it does make me feel more comfortable to know that somebody has like that specific one, you know, like in their kind of itinerary, because it is such a nuanced thing that I think the civvies, if you will, don't think about it because they don't do it. But my relationship with that client is a lot better than with her previous case manager, who just didn't have that experience, because she knows that there's certain things that she doesn't even have to say, really, or like elaborate on, that I will understand, because, you know, it might, with this client, I know that, you know, she doesn't love talking about it a lot. So, I was gonna answer another one of them, but I'll
Go for it.
Okay. And the ways that I'm still closed off from my practice, practice. Let's take myself a little bit too seriously. Life's a practice. I don't talk about it with my coworkers. It still makes me nervous to even think about mentioning to some of my coworkers that I've experienced the things I've experienced, because I work for like a upper middle class agency, and like people who grew up in like the suburbs of Illinois, and like these like, to me the houses in Illinois are like idyllic. Those neighborhoods are like insane. Like, you know, the backgrounds are just like we're just not coming from the same understanding at all. So I don't have that level of like closeness with all but like two of my coworkers, and it does make me have to like quite frankly like muzzle myself in like certain situations, especially when my colleagues are saying, ironically, saying like really like anti-homeless or like classist things that they don't even realize are classist, because that's just not how they grew up. And I don't feel supported enough to be like the person to like call them out, because I just don't. So hopefully that changes, but yeah, that's my answer. Oh, you got like 3.
Hi. Hello. Hi. So, first off, welcome to Canada, Jupi.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoy your stay.
Yeah.
So this is actually going to be an interesting point coming from me. I work with financial assistance in Ontario, so we do the Ontario Works. My partner right now, actually, she is a legal aid defense lawyer, so she's talked to me a couple times about the COGS and how difficult it is and trying to get people released. And so I'm just wondering, from, I guess, both of your perspectives, you know, once somebody is put into prison, and as they're coming out, and I've seen the struggles of, you know, people having to be put into the Lindsay jail, get sent to my region, and then have to find a way to get back to Lindsay to pick up their wallet because they were released at 12 o'clock at night. And so there's lots of difficulties with that. But I guess, what supports can we provide to people who are coming out of the prison systems to kind of bridge that gap? Because I know we have certain programs, John Howard Society, things like that, who are there to assist, but there's nothing that I can think of where we can just assist as best as we can to bridge that gap better. Like, we've been struggling with it for forever, and I started as a worker 12 years ago, and you know, that's something that I've seen my entire time. I've worked in homeless shelters, I've done all that stuff, and it's just always so many people who are struggling coming out of the prison system to try to get back on their feet, but there's just nothing there for an immediate support. So what would be suggestions that you guys have for something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I can think about 2 aspects of it. And the first one, like the most immediate need, is dedicated housing for people who are being released. Like GP mentioned that, like, for some prisoners getting out, there are access like through the parole system. There are these like halfway houses so that people are moving into one facility and have to stay there for a period of time and then move to another. For people coming out from the provincial system, though, which again is the large majority of people, that there is no such program. In Hamilton, for instance, there is one not-for-profit that provides housing for people who are just freeing up, but they've got literally like 3 beds. And their facility burned down, and they haven't reopened. Yeah, so the services don't exist. So that would be like a huge one. So on the one side, this like material support of just like somewhere to land, because like you said, like the person you trust are often going to be the relationships that are the most exploitative, right? Like the people who are going to be most there for you. Sometimes are the people who you least are excited to see when you're trying to channel the person you want to be. But the other part is, like, I know for me, when I get released, I'm like hard, you know, like it takes me like a while to come out of my shell. Because the prison is like, you're never safe, you're never alone, you never have any privacy, you're experiencing violence, like people are getting beat up around you every single day. And I just come out really hard, and I come out not caring about what happens to me, I come out not caring about the consequences of my actions. I come out really, just not myself. Right, and those are the skills. Those are like skills that are required to get through the experience. And in order to stop being like that, I need support, right? And usually I get that from my friends. I'm really lucky to have like a really good chosen family of people who've been there for me. But I think so, like, people need time and they need just like support from people who get it, right? And I think that's exactly what you're saying, of just like when being able to open up to somebody who has that kind of like micro experience that you're trying to share, and like that you don't have to explain every little thing, you don't have to defend yourself. Just somebody who knows what it's like to like free up. So I could see there being like a big role for peer support in that. Just to be like, it's okay, like you're all right now. Like you have a door you can close. Nobody's gonna come in here. You're all right for now, and just like let some of those layers of hardness melt away. And just re-entering society. Because like a lot of folks, like when you're doing the in and out and you're bouncing back and forth, you never get out of that hardness. You never come out of that hard place. And yeah, I think just like supporting people and doing that. It's one of the things, again, we try to do with the phone line and being there, of just like, I just want to give people a place to talk about how much it sucks to be locked up. I want to give people a place to talk about how much they miss their family. I want to give people a place to just like talk about that vision of the person they want to be in, the life that they want to lead, and the fear of not achieving it. Because oftentimes I think it's maybe hard to understand if you haven't been there, but getting released from prison is really scary. And a lot of people like have forms of crisis as their release date approaches, if they have a release date. People call it like shaking it. But yeah, like the reason for that is because of just like the awareness of how little support you have, how likely it is to just get fucked up again, and how likely it is to just like end up back there. You're just being set up for failure in every possible way, and you feel it. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of to add to that, I have clients that have been in my program for like 10 years who have like backgrounds, and they still kind of walk around with that kind of like hardness, or like waiting for like the rug to be ripped up from under them, because that's what the system like tends to do. It's not like that's not what happens. I'm fortunate to work with an agency that's very stable with our clients, but it does make like it can make working with somebody, I don't want to use the word difficult. It can make it a little more extensive to get to a point where that person will want to open up. But as far as your question, I also am a big proponent of jail support. This isn't something that happens like at our nonprofit jobs, though. That's just something that organizers do, from my understanding. But that's like the other part of my life. So, but with jail support, if you're not familiar, it's folks that stand outside of prisons as people are getting released. The services that they provide can vary greatly. In the work that I've done with jail support since 2020. It's mostly legal aid, so getting people in contact with lawyers so that they can talk about their charges. Especially in the summer of 2020, this was a big deal because, well, now in Atlanta, they're giving people RICO charges for protesting Cop City. But, during the protest, it was kind of a similar thing. Like, they're racking up charges for people. So getting them in touch with, like, pro bono lawyers. And then also, I've provided some shelter support in the past for folks to get them to some sort of transitional housing, but like Cedar said, that option is like very limited. Very rarely are there beds, and shelters close, and there's a line. You have to be in that line like all day, and it's just a whole thing. So I do think kind of our homework as a group, I think, is to just think about what that looks like, so that we can keep talking about it in spaces like these until it becomes a real thing. But yeah.
Thank you. I think we have one last question. I'm sorry, we're just about at time, but I feel like our wonderful speakers are going to be able to answer a couple questions after the session ends. Apologies.
Hi, my name's Sean. I have experienced both the provincial and federal systems in Ontario. And I agree that the health care is absolutely abysmal. During my trial phase before being sentenced and going to federal, I was diagnosed as having ADHD, found medication that actually helped me and turned me around, made me become who I really am, I guess is the best way to put it. And that wasn't provided for me when I went into the federal system. They said this is something, as you were saying, this is something that can be used as a drug, a narcotic to give to somebody else, so we're not going to give it to you. So I went through a lot of just having to deal with my ADHD on my own without any kind of support. So absolutely, that is absolutely one of the things that happens in the system, and they bring you down with these actions. As far as the wounded parts of yourself that you could use to support others, I do peer support work now for homelessness, not for justice system, but that is something that I want to get into, is working with people who have been in either the provincial or federal system. So I was just wondering if you know of any, I haven't been able to find anything myself, just if you know of any associations or anything like that allow for assisting people as they're getting out to find a peer who can help them find any form of place to live, find jobs, just get themselves out of that cycle of the revolving door of the justice system.
First of all, thank you so much for just disclosing and putting yourself out there as having that experience. I'm really grateful to all the folks with lived experience who shared things today. So the only programs I know that do things like that tend to be small religious ones. So in Hamilton, there's a group called Grenfell Ministries. Unfortunately, the person who was running that died in the last year. But that group operates different chapel times, or just discussion circles, or just meetups for folks who are formerly incarcerated. And so it's a place where a lot of informal peer support happens, and there's a little bit of a casework element. And I know sometimes the mainstream ones like John Howard and EFRI will offer drop-ins or groups or things like that, which honestly, personally, I steer clear of because those guys are way too close to the prison system. So they're not. I found those services personally not useful. But I think just the kinds of services you're describing, I would love to see those get taken up. Yeah.
I know we just clapped, but I feel not yet, but almost, that this has been such a good space for our presenters and the things they've shared, but also all of you for being here and being open and connecting together. I hope that if you see us all around the conference, if you see the speakers, there's lots of opportunity to come and share. And so now is the time. Let's clap again. Yeah!